The wall. As already mentioned, the Bhayandar Valley is bounded on the north by a wall of rock peaks which rises to a maximum height of about 20,000 feet. I had often looked at this wall with the idea of ascending one of the peaks on its crest. The difficulties were obviously formidable, for the wall is steep and complicated and consists of rock buttresses, with precipitous little glaciers perched on shelves in between, except to the east, where it is breached by a glacier pass of about 16,500 feet, which Wangdi told me was sometimes crossed by shepherds en route to the village of Mana. It was a pretty mountaineering problem and as such appealed to me enormously. The day after our descent to the base camp, Nurbu left for Joshimath to collect my mail and some more coolie food. The men took turns at this work, which helped to relieve the monotony for them. Thus I was left with Wangdi, Pasang and Tewang. The day the same day I took Pasang with me on a little expedition up to the side of the valley, which had as its object flower collecting and an examination of possible routes up the wall from the base camp. The former yielded nothing of special interest. There seemed at this period to be a halt in floral growth, the earlier flowers having passed their best, while many of the later flowers were not yet in bloom. During the ascent of a grassy buttress, we disturbed a nestful of young pheasants, which scattered in all directions. They could barely fly, but had learned to glide with considerable skill, though their takeoffs and landings were deplorable and reminded me of my own first solo efforts at the Air Force. Pasang was unwilling to let them escape so easily, and after a horrible grimace at me, intended to convey a fact that they were good to eat. He went hurtling down the steep unbroken hillside. He aimed a number of stones, but not accurately enough, and with a shrill derisive squawks, the pheasant disappeared into the depths of the valley. As regards the second object, the most likely route appeared to follow first a grassy ridge, then a series of rock buttresses to a small glacier, whence it should be possible to mount to the crest of the wall by means of a slanting ridge and a snow filled gully. We commenced the ascent next day. As it was high time Tewang had some exercise, I took him in addition to Wangdi and Pasang. He did not yet get very far. He had climbed less than 1,000 feet when I noticed that he was slipping about in a positively dangerous manner on the wet and slippery grass. He had no nails in his boots. In a laudable to him desire to take back his climbing boots, new and unworn to dazzling, where they would doubtless command a good price, he had substituted a pair of boots so decrepit that a tramp would have scorned them. I ordered him to descend to the camp at once, put on his climbing boots, and return. But when I saw him painfully and slowly descending the slope, obviously tired and perhaps still feeling the efforts of his poisoned leg, I relented and told him to remain at the base camp. We camped at the foot of the first rock buttress to one side of the narrow gully protected from falling stones by an overhanging rock. On the wall of the gully was a bird nest which Wangdi managed to reach after some sensational gymnastics, followed by a still more sensational, not to say dangerous, downward leap into the bed of the gully. He said that it contained young, but what manner of the bird it was I could not tell, as I did not see the mother. While Wangdi and Pasang were pitching the tents, I scrambled up the gully over a couple of easy pitches on the sloping crest of the buttress. This led to the foot of the another buttress where the rocks were much steeper. At first sight it appeared as though a route might lie up the rocks to the east of this, but when I attempted to climb them I found that they were both smooth and steep. An alternative was straight up the nose of the buttress, and here, entirely through my own fault, I got into trouble. By dint of an awkward bit of climbing, I reached a juniper clad ledge only to find that further progress was impossible, or at least desperately difficult. I had no option but to return, and it was during this descent that I encountered an unexpected difficulty. On the ascent, I had utilized an apparently firm hold in the middle of a slab. Though being a staunch believer in the 3 point of attachment theory, I had also utilized good handholds, but when I descended, the holds broke away beneath my exploring foot. It was possible to descend the slab without it, but very difficult, and it was half an hour before I succeeded in finding the right combination of finger holds. Climbing alone in such circumstances is a trifle too exhilarating. In safety once more at the foot of the buttress, I investigated the west side of the buttress, and here there appeared to be a route, although not very easy route. At last alternative, I traversed across the mountain side to determine whether or not the glacier was accessible to the east of the route originally planned. There may there may be a route here, but it is not a justifiable route as the lowermost tongue of the glacier is loaded with stones and boulders of all sizes which it precipitates at intervals down the mountainside, and I soon decided against any further reconnaissance. I was returning when of a sudden there was a crash, and above a crag to my right, turning over and over against the blue, there appeared a block of rock the size of a grand piano. Without touching anything for several hundred feet, I descended with a noise like shell, struck the rock with another crash, and burst into fragments which hummed and whistled through the air before plunging into the snow slopes below. After lunching in camp, Wangdi and I set out to scale the upper buttresses. The climb began with a steep pitch with uncut holds. Then it was easy going to a wall about 20 feet high, on which there was an awkward move diagonally upward to the left. There was only one satisfactory hold, and getting onto it while being pushed outward at the same time by an overhanging rock was not easy. So critical was the balance. I managed it with Wangdi waiting below to field me in the event of slip. This wall was the only serious difficulty, and above it was a series of easier pitches and grassy ledges brought us to the crest of the buttress. The usual afternoon mist had formed, so we waited in hope of temporary clearance. It came as we saw before us a slabby ridge running up to the left of the glacier. As we were merely reconnoitring, we left the rope and followed the ridge as far as the slabby portion, then traversed off it on the snow slope which should afford an alternative route in the event of slabs proving impracticable. Only satisfied with our reconnaissance, we returned to the camp. There was plenty of juniper handy, and to counteract evening chill, we built a large fire. If the base camp fire was remote from civilization, this life of the bivouac camp was remoter still. There was not a breath of wind, and the smoke of the fire curled lazily up the cliff to vanish in the deepening blue of the evening sky. From our position, which must have been about 2,500 feet above the base camp, we gazed down the lowermost portion to the Bhayandar valley, to the hill of Joshimath and the Kuari Pass. A vast range of cloud lay athwart the foothills, glowing too brilliantly that the shadowed hillside in our vicinity reflected a faint opalescence. But the splendor of these cloud citadels was short lived, and half an hour after sunset, night had fallen. There is nothing that promotes an intimacy of spirit better than a campfire. He is dull and unimaginative who cannot sense the spirit of comradeship that persists within this warm circle of dancing light. Wangdi talked to me of Nanga Parvat, and though my Urdu was execrable, I could understand very well that he said, for there were occasions when language is no bar to understanding. He had taken part in 1934 expedition, which ended disastrously when 3 Germans and 6 porters lost their lives in a blizzard. After describing he said, I have always felt lives in a blizzard. After describing it, he said, I have always felt that Nanga Parvat is difficult from other mountains. There is something there that will kill you if it can. It is a cursed mountain. I was asked to go again this year, but I said no. I would rather come with you because I am quite sure there will be another accident and that many lives will be lost. I can see him now, cross legged on the ground, the red firelight on his hard face, his lips clenched, the inevitable cigarette holder. Pasang woke me next morning at 4:30 and at 5:15 Wang Di and I were away, leaving Pasang at the camp. Now that we knew the route, we made rapid progress. The slabby ridge proved practicable and ended in a moraine while many primulas were growing, although the height cannot have been less than 16,000 feet. A sloping shelf led without difficulty across the glacier to a snowfield whence the rocks rose sheer for fully 3,000 feet. Only at one point was there any hope of scaling them without excessive and, to judge from the amount of fallen stones on the glacier, unjustifiable difficulty. And that was where the ridge already mentioned slanted steeply upward toward the crest of the wall. Unfortunately, the ridge ended in formidable cliffs. We tried at first to climb, but I tried first to climb these, but after wrestling with a loose gully and looser rock above it, were forced to retreat and seek an alternative. This was by no means obvious until we discovered a snow-filled gully leading through the rocks to the crest of the ridge. The unpleasing feature of this gully was a wide crevasse at the foot of which had to be crossed by a snow bridge. The crevasse was wide and abysmally deep, and two or on the rope the fragile snow bridge spanning it had to be treated with circumspection. Wang Di did not like it at all, but he had spent 3 hours in a crevasse of Kanchenjunga, so some prejudice against crevasses in general must be allowed him. Once on the crest of the ridge, the going was straightforward from a time up broken rocks and sharp snow edges, but the general angle increased gradually and with it the difficulties, whilst the weather was now brought to our attention by a drizzle of snow. The crest of the wall was now not far above us, but the rocks leading to it were much deeper than I had supposed. In fact, where the rib ended, they sprang upwards in an almost vertical wall on which the snow, fallen during the recent bad weather, had accumulated to a considerable depth. Our objective was a conspicuous rock peak immediately to the west of the snowy gap, whence falls the snow-filled gully previously noted, and our one chance of success lay in crossing the gully and climbing directly up the steep face of the peak. It was an impressive place and obviously extremely difficult. Wang Di did not like the look of it and was, like myself, unfavorably impressed by the snow-covered slabs he should have to traverse in entering the gully. Fortunately, there was an excellent block of rock around which the rope could be placed to secure the party, and with this to hearten me, I embarked on the traverse. It reminded me strongly of the slabs beyond the Great Gully on Everest. True, the angle was steeper, and now, instead of being loose and powdery, was wet and heavy. But in the feeling of insecurity, there was a remarkable affinity between the two places. When at length I reached the gully, my doubts were resolved into certainty. The angle was steep and the snow was so soft that at every step I went in above the knees. True, there was a slight crust due to the overnight frost, but even if we succeeded in crossing safely, what would it be like when we returned? It would certainly avalanche, and there was no security. The gully was too wide to allow of enough rope to secure one man to the rocks while the other man crossed. To add to the jest, snow suddenly began to fall thickly and the wind rose, sending the scurrying across the already snow plastered crags. This is no good. Let us go down. Wang Di's voice was urgent. He was right. Nothing was to be gained by reconnoitering further. I rejoined him and we descended as quickly as possible through the snowstorm. Lower it was raining and we arrived back at the camp soaked through. But we soon forgot our misery and sense of failure when some hot tea was prepared by the thoughtful Pasang was inside us. Thus ended a climb which by alpine standard would have been accounted a difficult expedition. Our highest point was about 18,500, which meant that we had climbed 4,000 feet from our camp. It was still raining when an hour later we descended to the base camp. I was first down and I neared the camp. I saw Tewang, who was seated near the fire, suddenly darted into the porter's tent. He appeared just before I reached the camp and came out a few yards to greet me. There was a smirk of righteousness in the broad face. He was wearing his climbing boots.